So we're on chapter 26 in your U.S. history book, and we're going on to section 2, and we're getting into Dwight D. Eisenhower as the 34th president of the United States and his administration. I just wanted to give on each one of these presidents a little bit about their life so you could know about more about them, so you could know about their person and how they stood and what they thought was important, so here we have Dwight D. Eisenhower, the commander-in-chief of the Allied forces. He was also involved in Operation Torch in Africa and D-Day. He was the U.S. Army Chief of Staff in 1945. One of the greatest war heroes of World War II. Commander-in-Chief, Operation Torch in Africa, basically winning Africa over for the Allies. And D-Day in Normandy, bringing in America and, taking back France. That's D-Day that on June 6th of every year that we should be celebrating. And now we have, this general, 5-star general becoming president. In 1951, he was the first Supreme Allied Commander of the North Atlantic Treaty, NATO. So he also commander of NATO, and now in 1952 to 1960, he would become the President of the United States. Dwight Ike, his early life, Eisenhower's early life. Well, he was born in 1890 in Denison, Texas. Although he really wasn't a Texan, his father had come from Abilene, Kansas. And he actually lived most of his life in Abilene, Kansas. But his father worked in Texas for a while cleaning train engines. And his mother was a Mennonite and a pacifist. She didn't believe in war. Can you imagine? She was a pacifist, and one of her sons, being the greatest hero of World War II, and she didn't believe in war. She was a Mennonite. Some people say, well, she was a Jehovah's Witness. No, that's not true. She was a Mennonite, which is totally different than a Jehovah's Witness. So she was very religious, but also I believe she also gave a foundation of the Bible to her sons. He was the third son of 7. Can you imagine? She had 7 sons. And he was in the middle. So when they moved back to Abilene, Kansas, his father worked then for a creamery that belonged to his father-in-law, so his mother's father. And so at that time they had a catastrophe happen when his 10-month-old brother died of diphtheria. And Ike was just 4 years old then, but otherwise he remembers having a very happy childhood. Probably doesn't remember too much about that. But that, again, was a tragedy. So then he went on to Abilene College, and he played football, and he played baseball. He was a star. And after that, after school, he worked for the creamery, and he also volunteered as a firefighter, as a fireman. And both of these, all of his money that he made, that was extra, his extra money, he paid his younger brother's way through college in Michigan. So he basically helped him go to college, probably because Ike didn't know what he was going to do with his life. So he says, well, I'm going to help my brother, which he did. And he said, well, later on, you can help me pay for my college. Well, it never really happened that way. Of course, we'll find his life was in the military, and you would never think a family that was such pacifist would have their son be in the military. But in 1911, he had an appointment at West Point Military in New York, that military school they all want to go to. And he was accepted, and so now he went into a military college. He was then a star football on the military team, but he had a knee injury, so he had to stop with that. But he did graduate from West Point as second lieutenant. So here's a picture of him when he was younger and at West Point. Military for Ike now. So he was stationed in Texas, where he met Mamie Geneva Dowd. And 9 months later, they married. And on his wedding day, can you imagine? That's when he got his so-called degree, or so-called his military, as he got out of the military academy as first lieutenant. So he became first lieutenant on their wedding day. Here's a picture of Mamie Dowd marrying Ike Eisenhower. Their first son, Dowd Dwight, her last name was Dowd. Dowd Dwight was born, but he only lived to age 3 because he contracted scarlet fever. So another tragedy there. World War I began, and of course he desired to go. This is World War I, not World War II. He desired to go to Europe, but instead he was put in charge in Gettysburg to oversee the camp training of soldiers for war. So he was put in charge of training. So, and he rose through the ranks quickly, so he never actually fought, in World War I. In 1920, he was Major Eisenhower. In 1921, they had a second son, John Sheldon, and their first son had died, and this would be their only son. So, John Sheldon. So here we have, I put this in here too. It says, a people that value its privileges above its principles soon lose both. I think I already did that. I already put that one in there. But basically, we want to value our principles. So he was a very principled guy. Other military experiences. So in 1924, he was Army graduate of the school in Fort Leavenworth in military training. So in 1927 to 1929, he was under General John Pershing here, who was the Grand Commander of World War II. So he met him and was under, his experience was under John Pershing, which is a big deal. He was a hero in World War I. In 1929, he was chief aide under General Douglas MacArthur. And we found about World War II. Douglas MacArthur too would be a great, at this time, one of the great military heroes of the Pacific, at that time. In fact, between 1935 and 1939, Eisenhower served under General MacArthur in the Philippines. Remember, the Philippines were bombed? Well, Eisenhower actually left the Philippines right before the bombing. Otherwise, he would be with Douglas MacArthur over there. Here's a picture of Eisenhower and Douglas MacArthur. But in 1940 to 1942, Eisenhower returned to the United States, and then he was stationed in California. I think it was California and Washington too. So in 1941, he became the chief of staff of the 3rd Army in Fort Sam Houston, and he was promoted to brigadier general. He was transferred to War Plans Division in Washington, D.C. So now on to Washington, D.C. The war plans, because World War I had started. So just to know, he was under Pershing, he was under Douglas MacArthur, he was in Philippines, but right before World War II broke out with Japan attacking Hawaii and then attacking the Philippines, he had left and gone to California, and then he was transferred to the War Division because now he would be scheduled to be a general in World War II. World War II. In 1942, he was promoted to Major General. After a few months, he became Commander-in-Chief of the Allied Forces in World War II. He led Operation Torch, as I said before, in Africa, a big victory for the Allies. And then in January 6, 1944, was D-Day. He was in charge of the Allied forces on Normandy Beach, a major important day as the American soldiers came in really to save the day in France. France had been controlled by Germany by Adolf Hitler and the Axis powers. And Paris had been overtaken, and how D-Day, how America comes, in the nick of time to save the day. So after Germany surrenders, Eisenhower became the military governor of the United States occupied zone in Europe. So after the war, he was in charge of the governor of the United States occupied part of Europe, Germany. Of course, Germany was split, and in that split, Allied forces would have West Germany, West Berlin, and of course it was split to Russia, I should say the Soviet Union, would be east. And so Eisenhower would be in control of the Allied forces as that supreme military governor at that time. In 1948, he was the president of Columbia University until 1950. Can you imagine? Well, of course, he came to be a president of a university. So in 1950, the supreme Allied commander of NATO, so this too is very important. North Atlantic Treaty, in the midst of, we'll find out a little bit later on about NATO. But anyway, so here we have, here's the memorial of Eisenhower. Here it's a great memorial that's set forth as you go to see the memorial, and how his command with the American soldiers. And here's this picture. He's talking to the American soldiers in the midst, the French commander here. And I forgot kind of our English and French, in the midst. Here we go. This is Operation Torch, D-Day picture here. You can see. Let's go on. I like Ike, the Republican candidate for president here again. So in 1952, he retired from active service in the military. It's really weird because President Truman wanted to run his vice president. Truman already had 2 terms, and he said, you know what, if you run for president, I'll run and be your vice president. Now, Eisenhower Republican and Truman was a Democrat, although Truman was thinking, well, just come to my party, or whatever. Of course, Eisenhower wouldn't do that, but Truman really respected him greatly. And so then he ran for the Republican candidate, Richard Nixon, as his vice president. We went over that before. And Eisenhower then became the 34th president. And he picked up foreign relations then, now he had picked up with the New Deal and the Fair Deal policies, and we see how Eisenhower wanted less control of government control, more state and local government control than federal control. But we see that he picked up in the midst of a Democratic Congress that was still dealing with the New Deal and Fair Deal policies, and some of them good and some of them not so good. So the goal for him was to reduce tensions in the Cold War. In 1953, there was an armistice. Remember, he said, I'm going to go in and I'm going to go into Korea and we're going to stop this war in Korea. And he was going to bring peace to South Korea. So he would go there, and he did. So, and of course, Atoms for Peace, using atomic energy in peace times, we went over. He also even went to Russia. He met with the Russian, France, and English for peace in Geneva. He didn't go to Russia, but he met in Geneva, Switzerland. They met together and talked about atomic war, and talked about the atomic bomb. One thing I have to say about Eisenhower, he wasn't really big on dropping the atomic bomb. He thought that should not be. So he's not one president who said, oh, he wanted to drop the bomb. He didn't. He saw the devastation of it too. Although the bomb was dropped and it prevented a lot more people from dying, but still Eisenhower wasn't a big advocate of dropping the atomic bomb. In 1956 election, Eisenhower's second term was won by a landslide. We went over this already. The thing is, right before his election there, he had a heart attack. So then they thought he was actually in the hospital for like 6 weeks, but they still wanted him to run, and he did, and he won. So he won, but he had a heart attack before. So and from that point, he had heart problems his entire life. So he also created the United States Information Agency, and was in the beginnings of the CIA, and the Central Intelligence Agency, and began covert operations against communism, as now we were threatened by communism and threatened by the atomic bomb. So it says here he toppled the government in Iran and Guatemala. That too, we'll see that basically promoting communism in other countries, and we'll see how that goes, and we'll go into like Vietnam and the whole bit then. So, and of course we talked about the interstate highway. I didn't know it was 41,000 miles of highway he had built in the United States. Strengthened Social Security. Alaska and Hawaii became states. We went over that. In 1957, the Civil Rights Act established the Civil Rights Commission. He also formed NASA for space exploration. So here we have NASA. When we think of NASA and space, so we have the beginnings under Eisenhower. So we think of NASA, the states becoming Civil Rights Acts, all these that were under Eisenhower. So here we have pictures here, in the midst of all, here's, looking at the interstate highway, system going through here, and civil rights, and anyway, just some pictures. President Eisenhower's administration. In 1961, when President left, his farewell address from presidency, he was already president, had been president for 8 years. He ended with prayer. He ended with prayer. He started his administration with prayer, and he ended his administration with prayer. He was a praying man. He was criticized by both the left and right wings, but he was admired by both. He had very strong leadership abilities, and he was in charge of his administration. He despised McCarthyism. Remember, McCarthyism basically was a witch hunt for communism. And although President Eisenhower took a stand against communism, and especially how it was infiltrating in the government, he despised McCarthyism as going out and accusing people of being communists even before they were proven to be that. And that's what he hated. So he met with Nikita Khrushchev in 1959. He was the leader of the Soviet Union. And he tried to meet with him to promote peace. But during that time, they had a Soviet shooting down of U-2 planes, spy planes over Russia in May of 1960. And so all the hopes were dashed then for his meetings with Khrushchev on peace. So he warned our nation against the dangers of the Cold War, war against communism. But most importantly, and this is what I didn't know when I listened, I went and listened. You should go and listen to is just go on YouTube and say Eisenhower's farewell address and just listen. Not all the commentaries, because people are like, what does he mean? But when I listened to it and he explained it, I could see exactly what he meant. So it says, but more importantly, against the military-industrial complex, the partnership between the military and the establishment of big business, which threatened to exert undue influence on the course of American government. So what he was saying, it says, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. So what did he mean? Well, what he meant is he saw, when you listen to it, he saw, the big business of military, and now we have a whole, the scientific pursuit, all the science and technologies coming into the military arena, and all these people coming in with huge money and a lot of control, wanting to banking control and such, all of these, wanting to control through the military industrial complex, including the CIA and the FBI and all these things. And so now he said guard, because he said there are unwarranted people that are wannabes to be in control, and they'll try to get control of America and control the government through this avenue of coming in. And indeed, don't we see that? You can say we have, those underground evil that have gone on, in our government, so, and coming on, you see now, even lately, when you think of biological warfare and science and all these things. I'm not going to get into everything that's gone on that we know, but we know today what has happened, in the midst of the secrets of the FBI, the secrets of the CIA. And not only that, we have those with big money, billionaires, when you come in and control. And that's what he was talking about. And so we know that that's happened. So anyway, this is very important, because he gave a warning against the so-called, we think of conspiracy theories of the deep state, and the deep state, or the mafia, the invisible mafia coming in. Those things are like conspiracy, but he warned against evil. You think of the Antichrist, how the Antichrist would come in and control the government, and you think how he's looking and saying, yeah, through the military industrial complex, we have a way of evil getting in. And indeed we do. President Eisenhower's legacy. Ike retired with his wife humbly in their family's farmhouse in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. He finally did resign as a general, but later he would be reinstated by President Kennedy. President Kennedy would be the next president. He died of a long illness on March 28, 1969, in Washington, D.C. Army Hospital at the age of 79. He had ongoing heart problems, that he dealt with, but he was 79 when he died. It is really pretty amazing when you look at him, because both President Truman and the next president, the former President Truman, and the following president, President Kennedy, they honored him and admired him. So two Democratic presidents admired Eisenhower. Also, we see him greatly admired by Republican presidents, especially Ronald Reagan. He honored Eisenhower too. So we see a lot of the presidents they honor. And we have the memorial here of Eisenhower. I love this memorial. I showed that before. In fact, I have written here, President Truman said he wanted to be his vice president. He even said, well, it doesn't matter if I'm a Republican or a Democrat, at that point, and smiled. I just want to be your vice president. You can imagine. That's what Truman said. And he wasn't joking. And then President Kennedy reactivated his commission, and so that as he resigned, he reactivated his commission after his election to president, and held meetings with Ike throughout Kennedy's presidency. So again, Eisenhower talked to Kennedy about how the evil could be presented and coming in through the military industrial complex and stuff. He was important. So he's talking to Kennedy. And you know what? President Kennedy got assassinated. Now we know now, even this day, the Warren Commission said it was just done by one person, But now we see later on and they called him conspiracy. But now we see the Warren Commission was not right. And the reopening of the Warren Commission is that President Kennedy actually was assassinated, possibly by those infiltrating into the government through the CIA. So it may have happened, Now, I haven't researched that in detail. All of the movies on Kennedy assassination and all. And Lee Harvey Oswald, was in the military, and he basically said he was a patsy, which he might have been, so. But anyway, we have Eisenhower, advising Kennedy on many issues that have to do with this area. So, so I know that most historians look at him and they can't find a lot that he did wrong, and most have admired. It's rarely that I see someone that didn't admire Eisenhower and what he did and what he stood for. I know he always prayed before he spoke, and he was very Christian, so I believe he's going to be in heaven. He's born again, so he was quite a leader in a time where the world needed a leader. And he was a leader not only for the Allies, but he was a leader in the United States of America too. So he is definitely to be honored. So President Eisenhower. So now we're going to go on to President Kennedy. So we'll stop there.